I want to take a moment and thank all the people whose names you see on the screen. These are the patrons of the channel. You guys keep the channel going. Thank you guys very much. And if you like what I do and you want to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon set up. I'll go ahead and link it in the video description. There's other ways you can help, which is you can subscribe to the channel or you can click the like button. Thank you guys. Welcome to the Twisted Tentacle Inn. I'm your innkeeper, and today we will be talking about Counterspell and Dispel Magic. In my Sorcerer Spell Analysis series, I've been discussing spells from a sorcerer perspective. In my level 3 spells analysis, I went into the pros and cons of both Counterspell and Dispel Magic. Today, I want to go over those two spells again because I do think that they deserve their own video. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Counterspell is only available to sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards, whereas Dispel Magic is available to more subclasses or more classes. There are some subclasses that can get Counterspell, but there are very few. Whereas Dispel Magic, the base classes, all the spell casting classes, half casters, third casters, full casters, they all get Dispel Magic except for rangers. Both spells serve similar functions in that they aim to stop spells and effects from affecting your group in a negative way or affecting your enemies in a positive way against your group. So let's talk about the specific uses for each one, and then we're going to get into the pros and cons. Counterspell takes a proactive approach and it attempts to stop a spell before it even happens. Being able to stop a spell from being cast is one of the best defensive moves in the game, and it can prevent a bigger variety of ill effects than any other defense in the game. It's a reaction which frees up what you do normally on a round, and you'll still have the option to counter something and be able to take your actions as normal during your turn, which is a huge plus. This spell works best against enemy spellcasters and can really shut them down. Basically, a caster casts a spell and then you react with Counterspell. If the spell was level 3 or lower, it's shut down. If it's a higher level spell, you still have a chance to shut it down. You just have to make a check against it. Dispel Magic, on the other hand, is a more reactive approach. The spell's effects take place, and then they've already started to have an impact on the battlefield or your group, and or your social interaction or your exploration or whatever. You decide that the impact is more than you're willing to accept, so then that's when you'll cast Dispel Magic. Because this spell takes an action, it means that you have to wait for your turn in combat to end the spell effect, and you won't be able to do much else in that round. Now, based on this initial look, it may seem like Counterspell is straight, hands down, a much better spell. And a lot of people online are going to tell you that it is. But I disagree in a way. While Counterspell is a better spell in some circumstances, Dispel Magic is a more versatile spell, making it better than Counterspell in a lot more circumstances. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that Dispel Magic is a better spell. Not at all. What I'm saying is that it's not a black and white thing. Both spells have their pros and cons and are useful in different types of situations. So what does Counterspell do better? Counterspell completely prevents an effect before it happens. With Dispel Magic, a negative effect may have already been affecting your party, costing you valuable rounds and actions, but Counterspell prevents any effect from occurring at all. This is extremely important, specifically if a spell targets you, the caster, because let's say spellcaster is casting Hold Person on your group. Well, you're not going to be able to Dispel Magic if you fail your saving throw, right? So it's very important to end it before it even occurs. So that makes that a very, very powerful option to be able to counterspell something like that. As a reaction, casting Counterspell leaves you open to still continue your tactics using your action during your round if you're still in combat. There's also no chance of removing any buffs or positive effects from your party, unlike Dispel Magic, which can remove your allies' buffs if you're trying to dispel a debuff on them. Counterspell can also work on spells with a duration of instantaneous, like some summoning spells, for example, which Dispel Magic can't affect. In other words, Dispel Magic is only going to work on magic that has a duration or a lasting magical effect specified within the spell. A spell with the duration of instantaneous generally cannot be dispelled, but it can be countered. Counterspell can also stop a spell that targets multiple characters. So for example, if an enemy casts slow on your entire group, casting one counterspell prevents the spell from affecting anyone in the group. Dispel Magic will only end slow off of one character, so if your entire party was slowed, you're going to have to cast Dispel Magic on each individual that was affected in order to get rid of it from everyone. So then, what does Dispel Magic do better? It has a much better range and can end spells and effects with long ranges that linger beyond their moment of casting. So for example, in many games that I've played in, there have been situations where an enemy spellcaster casts Fireball on the heroes and one player says, I counterspell. But the enemy is casting from more than 60 feet away, which means it couldn't be countered. And this happens a lot more often than you might think. Now, of course, Dispel Magic also wouldn't be able to stop a Fireball, since it has a duration of instantaneous. But a better example would be a spell like Sleet Storm, which can be dispelled, and I posit that Sleet Storm is likely to have a bigger impact on your group if it's allowed to take place than a Fireball will. With Dispel Magic, you also don't need to see the caster or the magical effect in order to end the effects of a spell. That means that the spell works in darkness, or if you're in full obscurement, which Counterspell doesn't. So back to the Sleet Storm example, if the Sleet Storm encases everybody, including yourself, now you can't even counter other spells that are cast within the area of effect. So Dispel Magic can. You'll be able to get rid of the Sleet Storm even if you're in it, even if you can't see anything around you. Dispel Magic also can remove multiple effects with just one casting, even if the effects were from multiple spells. Counterspell can only affect one spell. So for example, if a couple of enemy spellcasters cast slow on your fighter, followed by that second caster casting fear on the same fighter, using Dispel Magic ends both effects. Or if an enemy group buffs their ogre with a bunch of buffs, so like they'll cast aid, bless, heroism, and invisibility, you got Super Ogre coming after you. Well, one casting of Dispel Magic is going to end all of those effects on that ogre with just one casting. With Dispel Magic, you can also determine if an effect is worth using a spell slot on before you waste a spell slot on it. So for example, if an enemy caster casts slow on the party and everyone succeeds on their saving throw, you just saved yourself a 3rd level spell slot because you're not going to have to cast Dispel Magic on anyone. Whereas with Counterspell, you're going to have to waste that spell slot because you don't know if anyone's going to fail that saving throw or succeed. So you're going to have to proactively cast Counterspell just in case, and now you've wasted a 3rd level spell slot. Another benefit of Dispel Magic is that Counterspell doesn't work after a spell has been successfully cast, whereas Dispel Magic can be used if the effects end up being worse than they were anticipated. So back to that slow example, let's say your party it has a paladin and you have really good saving throws, so you're like, I'm not going to counter the casting of slow because we're all going to succeed our saving throws. And now you roll and one person fails their saving throw, the most important person that you didn't want to be slowed. Well, now you can actually determine whether that slow is going to be extremely impactful and use Dispel Magic on it. Or if that slow affects a party member that doesn't care about being slowed, well, then you don't have to waste a spell slot. Whereas again, with Counterspell, you're going to use that spell slot because you don't know what the impact is of that spell when you cast Counterspell. Also, some creatures have magical abilities that aren't exactly spells, but they act like spells. And this works on some of those. Counterspell works on very few abilities that are like that. The other thing is you're not always fighting spellcasters, so Counterspell is going to sit in your spell list for sessions at a time without being used. This is fine if you're a spellcasting class like a wizard, where you have a lot of spells that you can memorize and it can sit, or if you're a warlock, again, you have a bunch of spells that you know with very few slots, so circumstantial spells become a lot more attractive. But if you're playing a class like a sorcerer, where your known spells are very limited resource, you're not going to want to have a spell that you're going to use every 3 or 4 sessions. Whereas Dispel Magic is a spell that's going to be handy just about every single session. I can come up with a use for Dispel Magic that would be impactful and helpful for the group. And unlike Counterspell, Dispel Magic can work on magical traps. If you come up across a creature that's being mind controlled or a door that's magical, there's magic items that may have some kind of negative effect, and other times that you might encounter just some magical effect in front of you. You can use Dispel Magic on those without the need to be there for when they were initially cast in order to counter it. So a very, very big plus there. And finally, by default, Counterspell can be countered by another casting of Counterspell. Dispel Magic can be used up to 120 feet away. And though Dispel Magic can also be counterspelled, if you're casting it from beyond the 60-foot range, there's no way they're going to be able to counter that. So you can actually dispel something from a safe distance without worrying about it being counterspelled. Whereas with Counterspell, if you're countering a spell from a caster who also happens to have Counterspell, they can turn around and counter your Counterspell. Now, I know it seems like the list of pros is much bigger for Dispel Magic, but that goes back to what I said in the beginning of the video. Dispel Magic has a broader range of applications, making it more universally useful. But the times when Counterspell comes into play can be some game-changing and major situations, more so than Dispel Magic, to be honest, in a lot of those circumstances. And it can potentially save your group a ton of wasted actions by preventing spells like hold person on multiple party members or slow on all your party members, that kind of thing, from affecting your group. So both spells have their uses, and both are great spells in their own ways. They serve similar purposes, but they also have vastly different purposes as well, making them both great choices for any spellcaster that's able to take them. So what are your thoughts on both of these spells? Is there a use for either one or limitation that I missed here in this video? Please let me know in the comments. It would be very helpful for anyone reading the comments and for myself. And that does it for today's video on Counterspell and Dispel Magic. I do hope this video was helpful for you, and if it was, please consider clicking the like button and subscribing. As always, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments down below. And I am your innkeeper from the Twisted Tentacle Inn. Check in anytime. I'll talk with you then. I totally didn't do that, so hold on. Hey, Papa. Hey. All right, off the bed. Now I gotta wait for him to go. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. Now they're crazy. It's not a gremlin. Just low-key. Let's calm down. Let me pet you. Maybe that'll make you relax for a little bit.
We have a guest who's been staying at the inn. His name is Suchart, and I wanted to do a magic trick to thank him for being a valued guest. So here it is, Innkeeper's magic trick. I'm going to make this ancient book disappear. Ta-da! I feel like I even tricked myself with this illusion. While I try to figure out how I just did that, sit back and relax